Thank you for joining us. We're joined in a bipartisan group of members who have introduced the Saudi Arabia Accountability in Yemen Act. We believe, at least many of us believe, that what is going on the floor today is incredibly important in terms of what the U.S. role should be as it relates to any conflict in Yemen and extracting the United States from that role. And Senator Murphy's been an integral part of this on the committee for some time, and today is part of the fruition of his advocacy. But at the end of the day, we also believe that that won't end, number one, the war in Yemen, that there are additional steps that have to be taken that are meaningful, such as those called for under the legislation that would provide sanctions to anyone who stops humanitarian relief into Yemen, that would have sanctions on those providing assistance to the Houthis, that would suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and that would have sanctions, global mandatory Magnitsky sanctions for human rights abuses, most particularly the death of Jamal Khashoggi, and for whoever that might be, and I think we collectively believe that is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Those are some of the elements of the legislation that we believe both advocate to move towards a resolution of the Yemen conflict, and at the same time sends a global message that just because you're our ally, you cannot kill with impunity and believe you can get away with it. That's a global message that we need to send. And at the end of the day, if we don't send that message, then I worry for what path we move ahead. With that, I'll stop there. Senator Shaheen, I'm told, has to go next, and Senator Graham's been gracious enough as our co-sponsor here to allow her to go first, and then we'll hear from him and Senator Murphy.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to be here as a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I think the Senate took an important step last week in sending a very strong message that what's happening in Yemen is not acceptable. We have a humanitarian disaster there, and we need to see some action by the Saudis to help end that. We took another positive step forward today, and hopefully we will follow that again with passage of the legislation today. But I think more importantly in terms of the Menendez legislation is that this is not going away. This is something we are going to continue to work at because people need to be held accountable for what's happened. And this is a bipartisan effort that will continue. So I'm pleased to join my colleagues today, those people who have been in the forefront of trying to call attention to what's happening in Yemen, to call attention and hold people accountable for Jamal Khashoggi's murder, and to address the crisis that is happening with Saudi Arabia, and to say very clearly to them and to the rest of the world that we believe in the values of the United States that support human rights, that believe in the dignity of each individual. So I'm pleased that we hopefully will pass this legislation and that we will follow it with the Menendez sanctions legislation. Thank you.
Senator Graham.
Lindsey.
Okay, thank you. Well, one, I appreciate you and Senator Young for introducing the legislation, and I want to just make the record really clear. I support what Senator Lee and Sanders want to achieve, which is to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for the abuses in Yemen and go beyond that. I just don't like the vehicle of the War Powers Act. So what I think is that everybody who voted to move forward on the Lee-Sanders approach will vote for Menendez and then some. So why? Why is this important? The current relationship with Saudi Arabia is not working for America. They have been strategic allies and could be in the future. But right now, it is more of a burden than it is an asset. And why do I say that? This country, led by the de facto leader as the Crown Prince, has been a wrecking ball. And the Khashoggi incident is just one of many, but the most egregious, and I think most people can relate to why we're upset. To be an ally of America, I think more is expected from you, not less. If you want to integrate your economy into ours, There are certain things you have to accept, like the rule of law. If you want to buy our weapons, there are certain things you have to accept. How you use them matters. So I just want everybody in the region to know that if you're thinking about doing what MBS did and you want to have a relationship with the United States, good luck. It's not going to happen. I want to let the President know that I think you're right about Saudi Arabia having been a strategic ally, and they could be in the future, but I think you're wrong about what's going on here. The reason I am supporting this approach next year is I'm never going to let this go until things change in Saudi Arabia. This is coming from the biggest supporter of the relationship in the past. Myself and Senator McCain sometimes have had the lonely job of defending this strategic relationship in the past. But as to me, those days are over, because what's going on in Saudi Arabia between the Khashoggi murder, and MBS is complicit in it, the dismembering of Yemen, the imprisonment of the Lebanese prime minister in the most bizarre thing I've seen in 20 years, the embargo of Qatar without any notice to us as a nation where we have 13,000 troops. Enough is enough. So to our friends in Saudi Arabia, you're never going to have a relationship with the United States Senate unless things change. And it's up to you to figure out what that change should be. From my point of view, the current construct is not working. And there's a relationship between a country and individuals. The individual, the Crown Prince, is so toxic, so tainted, so flawed, that I can't ever see myself doing business with Saudi Arabia in the future unless there's a change there.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Thank you, Senator Graham. I want to thank all of my colleagues who supported moving forward on our resolution just about an hour ago. 60 votes from Republicans and Democrats sends a very clear signal to this administration and to Saudi Arabia that if this administration doesn't reorient our policy towards Saudi Arabia, then Congress is going to do it. I'm supportive of Senator Menendez's legislation. I thank him for putting all the time into it. And I would note that both he, as the incoming ranking member, and Senator Risch, as the incoming chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, were amongst those 60 votes today that voted to move forward on this resolution. I hope that portends the ability for our committee to work together next year to put forward and advance this legislation. But to simply reiterate what Senator Graham said, listen, Saudi Arabia is our ally. But when your ally jumps into a pool of sharks, you aren't obligated to follow them. There is a line that Saudi Arabia crossed, I would argue, long ago. And unfortunately, it is now up to the United States Congress to try to make clear what this relationship can be and has to be going into the future. Yemen is one of the symptoms, and unfortunately, it is the most disastrous of them. 85,000 kids under the age of 5 have died from starvation and disease. All the evidence points to the fact that many times the Saudis are using our bombs to deliberately target either civilians or civilian infrastructure. But as Senator Graham mentioned, from the blockade of Qatar to the kidnapping of the Lebanese prime minister, Saudi Arabia's foreign policy went off the rails some time ago. And we are still the senior partner in this relationship. Sometimes it seems as if the United States is the junior partner. We are not. And we can use our sanctions, we can use our military support, we can use our reputational value as an ally to make clear that the Saudis need to start behaving differently in the region. And again, we're going to push this legislation next year. But there are lots of ways in which the United States Congress can have a big impact on the United States relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's the annual appropriations budget that includes funding for a number of joint projects with Saudi Arabia. The Congress still has the power to reject any arms sale that the administration puts before us. And we hold the ability to use sanctions, as are in this legislation, to punish certain individuals for their bad behavior. And so I think it's important for us just to get together. I know Senator Young wanted to be here as well. He was on the floor to make clear that though this resolution is going to pass, and it will represent the firmest rebuke of Saudi Arabia that the United States Congress has given in the history of our relationship, it is just the beginning. Unless this administration and the Saudi Arabian regime make a decision to both start acting differently and resetting the foundation of our relationship. And so I look forward to working with these partners through the end of this year and into next year.
Thank you. A couple questions, if you have. Yeah.
What are the main sticking points with Chairman Corker on your legislation currently? And do you have a commitment from Senator Reich to advance this legislation next year?
I haven't had a conversation with Senator Risch yet as the incoming chairman on a whole host of things. I look forward to that. I don't know that it's of great worthwhile to go through what are their differences because we're not going to get it done at the end of this year time-wise because there are differences. But for me, at the end of the day, one of the most significant differences we have is on mandatory global Magnitsky. And I think that's a critical part, the heart of particularly dealing with the Khashoggi matter. And so we had a difference on that. And there were others that I was willing to cede on, but not that one. Yeah.
Senator Graham, you had called the Crown Prince a wrecking ball. You called him dangerous, toxic,
Crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Last night, the president told Reuters that at this moment, it certainly does mean the United States is standing by the Crown Prince.
I saw
just
that.
like it's saying by the Kingdom.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that, and what message does that send to the rest of the world?
Well, sometimes Congress charts its own path. I remember during the Bush administration, Senator McCain and others, we passed the Detainee Treatment Act. I think Bob, over the objections of the Obama administration, pushed hard for Iran sanctions. Every now and then, Congress asserts itself, as Senator Murphy said. I think the president's dead right about the strategic relationship being meaningful, having been meaningful, and could be meaningful in the future. I just see this event as a game changer. I've been there a lot. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan 46 or 47 times. I don't expect to go back again and try to explain why this is okay. This is not okay. And I don't think the president believes it's okay. The question is what to do about it. To me, it is a defining moment for us as a nation, for the future of Saudi Arabia, and for the Mideast in general. There are a lot of bad actors in the Mideast. We just don't need to condone any more than we have to. And this is a situation where you don't have to. They need us a lot more than we need them. And to not realize that, I think, is a mistake. 9% of our oil imports come from Saudi Arabia. We'll find more oil here and other places to make up for that. And when it comes to military assistance, if you think Russia and China is going to provide you better protection than the United States against Iran and other common enemies, you can go down that road if you like. So I just believe that the relationship, while valuable in the past, has become too much of a burden. And as long as MBS is around, I don't think it will ever be normal again.
Senator, hi, thanks. Often Congress tries to assert itself on foreign policy, but often we hear these issues rise up and then votes not quite getting there on the war powers resolutions in the past and now there's what sort of commitment is there to pushing this forward next year? I know you mentioned you haven't spoken to the chairman, your new chairman, but what kind of guarantee that something would really get moving next year?
Well, look, first of all, there are those who believe that this resolution that Senator Murphy and Senator Sanders and Lee have been pushing would never get there, and there's going to be a vote on this today. And I think it's going to be a very robust vote. So that's an example. Secondly, I have used my leverage whenever I can as a ranking member. So I have stopped Saudi arms sales by virtue of the comity that exists in the committee where the chair and the ranking can stop an arms sale. For so long as the administration doesn't change that long-standing practice, I don't envision myself releasing arms sales until we have a different change in what Senator Graham has talked about in the kingdom. And then right now there are a series of leverage points that the ranking member has on the Foreign Relations Committee, whether to even have a hearing, whether to go through nominations, whether to allow somebody to have a hearing for a nomination. I intend to use everything I can in an effort to make sure that we get votes on this legislation. And I am thrilled that this is a bipartisan effort, which I think will only grow. Senator Graham's on the legislation, Senator Young is on the legislation, several others have talked to us about getting on, and we have a slew of Democrats who have not signed on because we're just simply trying to create parity as we go along. But otherwise, we'd have a good chunk of the United States Senate on this. We will find a way, a process, a procedure to make sure that we get a vote. And I would expect that will send the most defining type of action we can to Saudi Arabia. But I continue to insist it's also a global message. If you can kill with impunity and nothing happens to you as our ally, then that sends messages to Duarte in the Philippines, sends messages to others in other parts of the world that if you just have some strategic relationship with the United States, you can do anything, almost anything you want. That is not the America I know. It is not in the national interests of the United States to abandon our commitments to human rights, democracy, and international rules of law. When those are observed, we ultimately have the best, deepest, and most secure relationships in the world. We need to aspire and continue to work towards that. The legislation, I believe, not only deals with Yemen and Saudi, but deals with that global message as well. So we're going to do everything we can.
And just to underscore a point that Bob made, whether we like it or not, arms sales are a big part of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And you cannot continue arms sales without congressional support and approval. In the past, the motions were privileged in the Senate, but not in the House of Representatives. It's going to be difficult to find the votes to approve arms sales with Saudi Arabia in the Senate and the House next year, given what Senator Graham has said and what others have said, if this policy doesn't change. So it's hard to maintain the relationship with Saudi Arabia without a willing Congress, given the powers and the privileged resolutions that are available even to those that aren't in legislative leadership.
Senator Menendez, Senator Graham, why do you think that the president doesn't share the view that you and so many members of Congress have about the Crown Prince?
Well, he's in a different spot. We had our discussions with President Bush about interrogation policies. He said, my job is to protect the country, hear the threats as I see it. Senator McCain and I said, well, we're making the problem worse, not better. The president observes it's a dangerous place. You're absolutely right, Mr. President. But what would make it more dangerous is if every civilized norm was overlooked. I mean, for us to kind of withdraw makes it more dangerous. Every time America withdraws from the field, somebody fills in the vacuum. So the construct of is that they're a valuable ally, it's a dangerous place, I don't buy. I think what happens is that I'm not questioning his motives, I'm questioning the decision-making process. I think for us to ignore this makes every American traveling more at risk. I think anytime you withdraw from civilized norms just because somebody has got a unique relationship with you, you're creating more dangers, not less. So the bottom line for me is I think the way forward for the strategic relationship to survive and insist on fundamental change. And I have a difference with the president about how to bring that about.
Let me just say from my own perspective, I don't know all of the president's motivations in terms of the position he has taken here with the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. I don't know whether there are economic considerations or not. I know that arms sales are overblown in terms of real dollar amounts. And I'm happy to have our staff put out there what is the real dollar amount. I keep hearing this $140 billion. It's a fraction of that, so that's not as significant as it would seem. the Saudis are still going to see the Iranians as an existential threat.
Right.
So they're going to continue to be in our sphere. And if, as Senator Graham said, they think the Russians are going to solve their problem, well, the Iranians are in an unholy marriage with the Russians in Syria. And so at the end of the day, I don't know that I want to put my fate in a country that has an alliance with Iran in another interest that Russia has. And they have purchased between 30 or 40 years worth of our weaponry just to replace it. They're going to consistently need to have a relationship with us. So our legislation doesn't say it's the end for our relationship with Saudi Arabia. That's not what we're saying. But we are saying that Saudi Arabia has to change. That's our motivation. I don't know what the president says.
Can I just fill in the blank about weapon sales? Again, I have been sort of one of the leading advocates of this relationship, where it becomes to suing them for 9/11 and other things. I mean, for me to change is, I think, matters a bit here in the body, to join forces with coming down hard on Saudi Arabia. In terms of weapons, we have to think long and hard as a nation. Under the current construct, with somebody this unstable, do you really want to transfer your most advanced technology to somebody who thinks it's okay to lure a journalist to a consulate in Turkey if you're a Saudi and chop him up and think you're going to get away with it? Is it okay to transfer your most sophisticated weapons to somebody who seems to be irrational on multiple fronts? So to those who want a normal military-to-military relationship with Saudi Arabia, count me in. What is going on is not normal. I think it would be very risky for America, given the current regime's behavior, for us to transfer our most sophisticated weapons, because maybe one day he wakes up and gives it to Russia and China.
Senator Young has just joined us, and we're in a Q&A, but by all means,
I'll just, some brief thoughts. I just came from the floor, offered an amendment to the underlying resolution. I want to thank my colleagues for their leadership on this issue. I've been working on this issue since March of 2017. This much is clear. Americans don't approve of using food and medicine as weapons of war. Americans do indeed want us to follow international humanitarian law, and they want us to expect the same of our partners. Now, the world is a very dangerous place, and sometimes we have to partner with countries we don't always agree with. But this has devolved into not only the worst humanitarian crisis in generations, 14 million people on the verge of starvation, but a serious national security crisis. And as Yemen continues to deteriorate and more people become starved and they become radicalized, which we see on the ground, then Iran's foothold in that country is only going to grow. Al-Qaeda's only going to grow in their resolve. ISIS's presence is only going to grow in this country. So this is a serious national security issue, and that's why it's essential that we send a message giving our administration more leverage as they try and press the Saudis to negotiate in Sweden in good faith. And moving forward, we all know that the only conclusion, the only end to this horrific situation is going to be through a negotiated settlement. That's what all of us want.
thank you all. Appreciate it.